Hello and welcome to my presentation. I would like to talk about the effectiveness of Lufthansa's business practices in terms of corporate governance, SRI, and value creation. As you may know, Lufthansa is a German aviation multinational that operates worldwide. To give you some key facts, in 2019 the group had a market cap of 5.4 billion and a turnover of 36 billion. It has close to 140,000 employees that work in 5 different business segments. And until recently, the company was listed in the DAX. However, due to economic problems caused by the pandemic, it got kicked out, but it's listed in the FTSE for Good and the MSCI Sustainability, which are more important for today. In terms of market presence, it's strongest in Europe, followed by the US and Asia. Corporate governance. What is actually corporate governance? In essence, it's about the separation of ownership and control and the related problem of the asymmetric information distribution between the principal and the agent, so between the shareholder of Lufthansa and the management. And the shareholder fears that the company is not managed in his interests and the management is acting opportunistically. So in a nutshell, it's about company's efficiency and providing greater transparency for the shareholders as well as the stakeholders. I would like to have a closer look on the board of directors of Lufthansa. And basically what we do, we distinguish between the European board model, which is a two-tier board model, and the Anglo-American one-tier board model. So both of them has their strengths and weaknesses, and basically it's about the trade-off of faster communication and the less in control and for the tier 1 system. However, vice versa for the tier 2 board. And the problem of a tier 2 board is that the supervisory board is not so close to the real business and might lack some information. But the question is, how does Lufthansa solve the agency problem? And it's using a multi-layered system. The basis is formed by law, by the Companies Act and the Corporate Governance, which Lufthansa complies with just 2 exemptions. And in addition, they have on top of that an ombudsman system, and this is basically an external independent legal advisor. Plus, they have a code of conduct, which is a set of rules for the managers and employees and the suppliers. On top of that, there's the 2-tier management system, and finally we have internal and external auditing, like by the market and shareholders. So, is Lufthansa's board model good? And whether it's good and effective, we can see it from the direct comparison with Delta Airline and the evidence of literature. First of all, we can say that Lufthansa relies on a bigger board with 20 members, and 10 of them represents the owner and 10 of them the employee's interest. But basically they don't meet not that often, and we could think that this is basically bad for the performance. However, the literature shows that poor companies or poor company performance is usually an indicator when board has meet more frequently, and which in turn would speaks in favor of Lufthansa. Secondly, they don't have an CEO and chairman duality, which was only partially implemented at Delta Airlines after their bankruptcy in 2005. And the literature says, like, if you have those duality, you might have a better performance. However, you definitely face risks. And thirdly, the board is composed of 100% independent directors, and they have a higher diversity, and both of which result, due to certain studies, to a superior performance of their board. Next, I would like to discuss the topic of CSR and SRI. CSR basically describes the concept of ethical governance and focusing on primarily on the impact of corporate activities on stakeholders. And in other words, it's from the perspective of the company, where on the flip side, SRI is from the perspective of the investor and who tries to combine monetary goals with a clean conscience. And both are intended to create a long-term value. And so let's look what Lufthansa is actually doing. They did some recent changes in their strategic and operational level to meet higher ethical standards. First of all, in 2020, like this year, the CSR has been shifted to the board level. And a new compensation model, in addition, was released where they tried to stimulate and give bonus regarding sustainability to their management. Secondly, business partners also have to comply with Lufthansa's principles and ultimately ending in an overall sustainable value chain. Thirdly, we can say that as a result of the stabilization package due to the near bailout now in 2020, new environmental requirements has been imposed by the government, but I will come to this later. And in addition, we can say that Lufthansa is also pursuing some different concepts, like the compensate concept. It's an approach where customers can pay and compensate their emissions. Well, and due to the practices just mentioned, Lufthansa is basically captured in the screening process of an SRI investor and thus can participate in those SRI value process. And looking at my picture on the right I've created, the starting point is the SRI investor. And who allocates his capital according to his preferences. So he's basically screening the market for potential investments. And in most cases, however, he's not doing this by himself. Instead, and that's also in the case of Lufthansa, he invests in SRI investment products such as the BlackRock iShares, MSCI SRI, where Lufthansa is actually listed. And now the question, why would someone invest there? And according to the literature, we can say that there's an advantage of SRI by it's like minimizing the risk. So you filtrate stocks, based on or you filtrate out stocks that might face a bailout due to misconduct, and ultimately you have a better long-term performance. On the other hand, there is criticism, and it's based that there is less diversification due to this and further selection factor. And another negative point is that you might face higher agency costs because your asset manager has more work to do because he has to combine those different goals. Overall, however, the comparison of Lufthansa and China South Airlines shows that companies with a higher ESG ranking perform better. And Lufthansa has a consistent ranking of triple B over the years and indeed performs better. Respectively, it had a higher dividend yield. It has an overall higher ranking performance in their stock itself, even though South Airline has a higher market cap. And the reason might lie in the poor ESG ranking of B from South Asia Airlines. And for the past 3 years, however, BlackRock was criticizing Lufthansa for not meeting its environmental targets. So BlackRock has not only put pressure as an investor, as a shareholder, but also reduced their stake of Lufthansa in their SRI products due to the weak implementation of Lufthansa. And therefore, I would like to have a look where Lufthansa actually invests its capital or divests. And I've created in BCG matrix, and it reveals that the airline segment on the top left should be expanded, which the company is actually doing in case of acquisitions. They bought Eurowings, they bought Brussels Airlines, and some others. And at the same time, the company is focusing on concentration instead of diversification, and is thus divesting, for example, its catering business, where the turnover was disproportional to their personal costs. So they have already sold the LSG European business in this year, and they said they will further continue to divest this investment. And next, I brought an example, namely the acquisition of Brussels Airlines. And what I actually want to show is that not every investment decision is value generating. I've used the discounted cash flow method, and I calculated the enterprise value in a best, medium, and worst case scenario from today's perspective in relation to their purchase price. And what I actually did at the end, in case of going concern and taking into account the COVID situation, I discounted the perpetual annuity at the end, the cash flow in this period, by certain factors, by 50%, 25%, and even less. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that the investment in kind of any cases did not add much financial value. And we can say that that was not the optimal investment decision. However, it's just an example. Because let's discuss. If we critically analyze, we notice that Lufthansa tends to do a bit of greenwashing, let's say, especially in the field of CSR. New concepts like compensate there are great, but the responsibility is outsourced to the customer. And for this reason, large investors like BlackRock criticize Lufthansa for their behavior instead of investing more into biofuels. And also, the ESG ranking is good, but not very good. And the table shown below actually says or indicates that there is a lot of volatility and no long-lasting score change. That means neither emissions nor energy have been saved in the recent years, and thereby Lufthansa forgoes the opportunity to attract even more capital from SRI investors. By the same time, the lean approach is advisable as the whole industry is consolidating, and Ryanair's success confirms that this direction can definitely deliver value. Ultimately, in times of COVID, the return and the value of investments should be checked more regularly as an advice, whether it is with discount cash flow method, NPV, or real options. And if necessary, you have to divest to be liquid. And why this is important? Especially because due to the almost bailout, which caused that 2 seats of the supervisory board are now taken by the German government, and this ultimately limits the operational efficiency of the company. And this also has an immediate consequence on the shareholder value, because the company had to increase their capital by 300 million in order to this 20% stake of the government, without giving the option of subscription rights to their existing shareholder. And this means their shares got diluted, and ultimately the shareholder value got destroyed in the long end. So, in summary, we can say that Lufthansa is doing, in my opinion, many things right, which is due to the interplay of the different factors together. That means the check and balance approach of their board structure, which does not have the same efficiency as the American model, but it's safer, and it engages also good in CSR activities and has a solid ESG ranking and makes good investments and divestment decisions. However, there is room for improvement, and especially from the point of view from an SRI investor, the choice in this case, if you compare it with Delta, would Delta be here, and which has not an higher ESG ranking. It also has their returns on equity to their shareholders were higher, as you can see on the top charts over the recent years, as well as has a more stable earnings per share. So at the end of my presentation, I can say that we can state that Lufthansa should take more action in near future in order to stay competitive, and also need to focus more on sustainability in order to generate higher revenue in future. And thank you very much. This was my presentation. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.